If you're someone like me who doesn't usually enjoy taking photos in the middle of the day or in direct, harsh sunlight, then you've probably felt the urge to seek out some high ISO film stocks. But just like the rent, the costs of Portra are just too dang high right now. And Fuji left the 400 speed game altogether. But if you want a high-speed film stock that isn't going to break the bank, there is one surprising candidate out there that's still budget-friendly. So I wanted to ask, do you really need those sweet, sweet Portra tones, or can you get away with some lower cost film stock? Lomography recently reduced the prices for their 120 film stocks down to $34.90 for a 3-pack or $11.63 US per roll. But Kodak's Portra 800 is somehow still charging $80 for a Pro Pack or $16 per roll. So I wanted to find out, what exactly are we sacrificing when we go with the lower cost option here? Kodak Portra 800 is known for being a professional, reliable film stock that has well-controlled colors, a thicker backing material that doesn't curl, low halations, and is also known to be well-suited for a low-light photography. While on the other side, many believe that Lomo 800 is a film stock akin to Kodak Gold 800, which people believe is supposedly only made for lomography and Kodak's disposable film cameras. So I set up a test with Dmitri from Analog.Cafe and Yvonne Hanson from YouTube, and I'm going to link their respective content in the description below. But as always, we wanted to take this test a step further. This wasn't going to be your average run-of-the-mill, here's a bunch of photos that I took with each film, have fun looking at my awesome adventures kind of review. We wanted to get our hands dirty and dive deep into what makes these film stocks tick. And since we were already deep in the mud, we wanted to take a look at the Kodak Funsaver film stock at the same time, since that's rumored to be something special. So let's get into it. Here's the process that we used to cut down on as many variables as possible. Now, it gets a little bit complicated, so if you're a nerd like me, you're going to like this a lot. But if you just want to see the results, you can skip to the time code on the screen now. So I teamed up with Dmitri from Analog.Cafe and Yvonne Hanson to test Portra 800, the 800 speed film in the Kodak Funsaver disposable cameras, and Lomo 800. We also added a roll of Fuji 400 as a control so that you can see what a truly different film stock looks like. We loaded the four 35mm film stocks into Hasselblad backs using special adapters so that we could take the same photo in the same light with the same lens, focus, and camera settings. That way we controlled as many of the variables as physically possible, because old glass lenses can all have a mind of their own, and no two shutters will operate exactly the same, especially after sitting for decades in a damp basement somewhere. We took the photos in Yvonne Hanson's studio, and we worked with a talented professional model named Lauren Greaves, who goes by @GeneralGrievous on Instagram, which is also linked in the description below. She's awesome, and I highly recommend giving her a follow. Then we took the photos in a variety of scenarios, including in natural light, sunlight through the window, colored studio light, as well as in neon light and tungsten light outdoors. Then the 4 films were all developed at the lab in Vancouver so that we could ensure the same temperatures and chemical consistency. We also got a couple of high-res scans made at the lab using their Fuji Frontier film scanner just to compare our own scans with those from a professional lab. I scanned the film using the Sony a7 III that I'm using to film this video right now. I also used a light panel with a 95 plus CRI rating and the essential film holder. The photos were then converted using Negative Lab Pro under the guidance of the program's creator, Nate. Nate advised me in an email to use the roll analysis function on one of the rolls and then use that roll analysis preset to invert every other roll. Then, choosing the same image on each set, I synced every single setting except for preset, which would ensure that there was no difference in the way the images were converted. I used this for every roll in 2 sets, one for the studio shots and natural light portraits, and one for the night shots. The analysis and the sync settings were all based on the Kodak Portra 800 conversion, just to give a nice baseline. Negative Lab Pro does tend to equalize the conversions to make every image look good, regardless of the exposure or the film stock, but using these settings under the advice of the man who coded the program himself, we should be able to get the most accurate and comparable results possible. And here's how they looked. So one way that we can tell that this method worked is by looking at the Fuji 400 conversion. The Fuji 400 was unfortunately not the original Japanese Fuji, but the American version of this film. But in all the photos, it's very apparent that the Fuji images are darker than the rest, showing a true difference in the emulsion. So this is where it gets complicated. When you look at these images, there are slight differences in the photos, but the only one that I took and can immediately pick out as a different film is the Fuji 400 film stock because of the lower ISO. So I'm going to give you a quick test here. Dmitri was doing this with Yvonne and I in our group chat, and neither one of us were successful at choosing which was which. So here's the 4 images mixed up, and let me know down in the comments below how many you got right. Alright, so I spent a lot of time going through these images in Lightroom Classic and talking about them with Dmitri from Analog.Cafe and Yvonne Hanson. And admittedly, while there are some differences, I'm not 100% convinced that these are actually different film stocks. And when you look at the negatives, I think it gets even harder to spot the differences. So the reason I think that these may not be different simply comes down to the cost of making custom films. Because the Funsaver cameras, while popular, aren't selling in the same capacity as rolls of 36 exposure film. So tell me, why would Kodak make a separate custom film emulsion exclusively for these disposable cameras and for lomography, especially a custom ISO 800 film? High-speed film stocks are the most desirable because they are perfect for the way that most photographers want to shoot film. Most photographers don't want to set their camera on a tripod or use a flash. They want to take their photos instantly as they see them, and they don't mind the extra grain. In fact, many of us seek out that extra grain to give our images that unique vintage film look. If this were really a different film, such as Kodak Gold 800, which is a cheaper film stock, Kodak Alaris would be busting down Kodak Rochester's door to bring it to market because cheaper films sell more. And here's the thing, doing custom small batches would cost them a lot of money in downtime and add extra complexity to their line at a time when Kodak is actually pretty fragile. Companies make more money by producing more of the exact same product, which is called an economy of scale. That's why automakers want to make the add-ons like heated seats and steering wheels a subscription instead of a part that's added or removed from the vehicle during production. It is cheaper for them to produce more vehicles if every car comes with every feature that they can just turn on and off at the dealership. That way they can make the lines move faster instead of retooling the line for what amounts to nearly custom production runs. Of course, vehicle manufacturers also want that sweet subscription revenue, but that's a different story. So this is why when Kodak started losing money during the digital revolution, the first thing that they cut was selection. They kept the film stocks that are universal, and then they cut down on the niche purpose film stocks that just don't sell as well. Because these also slow down the production line and they cost a lot of money in keeping the products on hand to make them viable. Now, during these tests, we did actually find one major difference between all the film stocks, and that was that the film stock's base. Kodak Portra had the thickest acetate base, while the Kodak Funsaver film had the thinnest. That means the Lomo and Funsaver film stocks curled significantly more than the Portra did. And that might also have something to do with the color in the images. If you shoot medium format like I do, you'll know that Lomo 800 can be a pain in the butt to scan because of the curliness of the film makes it so difficult to handle, while Portra 800 is just a dream. If you've ever handled Lomo 800 yourself, you'll know just how frustrating it can be. I actually don't think there's been a single time I've worked with this film where it didn't fall on the floor at least once because of how difficult it is to handle. But the reduced base thickness might just be how Lomography is able to get their film to market just a little bit cheaper than Kodak Alaris. Even if it seems like they're pinching pennies here, the small savings per roll add up when you're buying hundreds of thousands of feet in film. So let's go to the computer now and take a closer look at the differences between these images. Dmitri pointed out that the Lomography film images always looked a little bit redder than the Portra or the film in the Funsaver cameras, which tend to show a little more green in the skin tones based on both of our independent conversions. You can see Dmitri's analysis and process on the Analog.Cafe blog post, which is linked below. But right now, let's go to the computer and start this analysis. All right, so now we're here in Lightroom Classic, and we're going to take a look at these images side by side. So what I want to do here is take a look at the grain, look at the color separation, and look and see if I can make them look the same with just a couple little sliders. All right, so we're going to start with the Kodak Portra on the right and the Fuji 400 on the left. You can see it in the edge markings on the side. But the first thing that I want to notice here is, of course, the Fuji is one stop darker because it's a one stop darker film. But also, the colors are remarkably similar, and I think it's because it's the American Fuji instead of the Japanese version of the film. All right, so let's go over to the Funsaver 800 film and take a look at these ones side by side. So Portra is going to be on the right and the Funsaver is on the left. And you can see some difference in the color in the background, which is interesting. And also the Funsaver is notably less sharp. You can see the grains. So that tells me that the scan was sharp, but the image itself wasn't. And that might have to do with putting 35mm film in a 120 bag. But when you look at the colors, they're quite similar. All right, so now let's go on to the Lomo, and the Lomo is much sharper, significantly sharper, and the colors are a little bit different. The Lomo is a little bit more red in the skin tones, whereas the Portra is actually a little bit more green in the skin tones. And it's important to note that these have not been edited at all, so when you're seeing these little differences, that it's not an edited photo. That's not how I would actually present these images in the real world. Okay, so I'm going to take this into Negative Lab Pro and I'm going to make a copy. So just make sure it's selected, go to Plugin Extras, Negative Lab Pro, and then click that little Make a Copy box and click Apply. And this is just going to export a TIFF, a positive version of the TIFF. So then I can edit this like a normal photo. I can use the sliders and they're going to be represented the way that I want them to. So if I move the tint to the right-hand side, then it's going to go more to the magenta. Whereas if it was a negative, then it would go to the greens, and it's kind of strange. It's really hard to work with. So I made a tint adjustment of plus 26, and zooming in, you can see that the Portra is nearly identical now to the Lomo 800. Even down to the background and the lighting. Just a very simple thing to make them look the same. And of course the Lomo is still sharper. Perhaps Lauren moved forward or back a little bit, or perhaps the film was not quite perfectly set on the film back. It's just one of those things that's really tough when you're using the wrong format of film in a medium format back. Okay, so now let's take a look at this image over here. This is an image of Lauren in sunset light. This was right at the end of the day, of the dying light essentially coming through the window. In the studio, it had this really nice glow to it, so we wanted to see how that would look. So this time I'm going to take the Lomo 800 and I'm going to put that on the right hand side, and then we're going to compare all the other films on the left hand side of the image. Here's the Portra, which you can see there's a pretty significant difference in the Kodak Portra versus the Lomo. Let's zoom in here and just take a look, and both of them are equally as sharp, and interestingly enough, the grains are remarkably similar. But you can see that the Lomo actually has a much nicer skin tone than the Portra does. The Lomo, it has a lot more reds in it, and it just kind of looks more natural. And even worse here is the Kodak Funsaver, which has kind of an unnatural wash to it. But the grains are also quite similar. It's fairly sharp overall, not perfectly sharp, but you can see that, like, if she's moving forward or back even just a slight bit, that can alter the sharpness of it. Since we can see the grains, we know that the scan is not the problem, it's the actual image itself. All right, so let's take a look at the Fuji here, and this is going to tell you what a different film stock looks like. So the grains are remarkably tight compared to the Lomo 800, but it's also not quite as sharp, and that might just be because of the grain size. It's actually a pretty interesting thing. But the colors are similar. One thing I want to note, though, is that the shadows on the Fuji specifically are a lot darker. So you can see on the Lomo, the shadows they're much brighter, they're much more usable. You have way more information, way more density in the shadows, which allows you to do more edits. Whereas with the Fuji, you can't do as much with those shadows. If you lose the information in the shadows with film, you can't get it back. One last example that I wanted to show you, just to see how quickly we can edit one of the samples to make it look like the other one. So this was a brilliant one that was done in the studio by Yvonne, using these colored panels that she found that make it work kind of like a one of those color passport checkers that you would see in the film industry. Because they're different colors, we're actually going to be able to see if the film is rendering the colors differently, if it's picking it up at different frequencies, meaning that one color would be darker on one film than it would be on the other. So the first thing that you notice right off the bat is that the Portra is a little bit more yellow, kind of greenish, and then the Lomo actually has really, really pleasing skin tones. The Lomo is fantastic in the skin tones here. Both of them are approximately the same saturation, the shadows are approximately the same, and the colors are fairly similar. You can see the separation is the really important thing. So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to make a very quick change to the HSL. Now, this image here is a negative, so that means that I'm going to move it to the right and the colors are going to act as if they're moving to the left because everything is inverted. So it's just a little bit different there. But I'm going to grab this little color picker here, and then I'm just going to sample this background. And there we go. Just a tiny, tiny little change. And then I'm going to desaturate it just slightly. And that's it. That's it. So with this, I only went up to +10 and +9 at the most on Q. So it's a very small change. And now let's go in and just zoom in and take a look at these skin tones specifically. So zooming in, you can see that the blue eyes are the same. There is maybe just like a slightly more red in the Lomo than there is in the Portra, but it's very, very minimal. So that's just how small of a change I had to make them look exactly the same. You can take what you want from that. Either way, this means that like if you can save a couple bucks by buying the Lomo, you can get exactly the same results as you would with the Portra, especially considering that these shadows are about the same lumosity on both of them, meaning that both of them are rendering the shadows just as well as each other. All right, and then we'll take a quick gander at the Funsaver, which is a little bit more green. So that one actually looks more like the Portra. I'm going to go back to the export setting here that I did last, and look at that. They're very, very similar to each other in terms of the way that they rendered the colors. So that means that I can make the same adjustments to the Funsaver film, and it'll look just as good. The last one that I want to show you really quickly is the Fuji, and this one, as you can see, is a little bit darker. Unfortunately, there's just a little blip there from scanning. And there's a little one there too. So you can see that the reds are actually fairly pleasing in the skin tone. They are a little bit more pleasing than even this adjusted Portra. And then the background is a little bit darker. You can see that the color separation is a lot different here. Now this color is a little bit more saturated than this one. They're all a little bit darker, which is what you would expect for a film that's one stop darker. And then the shadows are deeper. Surprisingly, the grain isn't that much different though. The grain is actually even arguably a little bit stronger there than it is in the Lomo until you get down into this area here. All right, so that's it for Lightroom. I just wanted to show you what I'm seeing when I'm looking at these images side by side and give you a quick analysis of the images. I personally think that the Lomo looked the best right out of the box, but all of them look fantastic once they have a little bit of editing, and it's totally possible to get the same quality images out of any of these films. Even the Fuji 400, surprisingly, even though the shadows are a little bit darker, we could especially see that on some of the more contrasty images. Overall, these films perform extremely well and are extremely flexible. Next, we have to look at the scans that came back from the lab. Now, if you're looking at my comparisons and you're thinking your rolls of Lomo 800 and Portra 800 look way different when you get them back from your lab, you're probably not wrong here. We went to the lab in Vancouver for all of our developing and got the Portra and Lomo 800 rolls scanned by their professional technicians using their Fuji Frontier scanner. Getting film dev'd and scanned at a lab is ridiculously expensive these days, and I honestly don't know how people afford this service, which is why we only had 2 of the rolls scanned. Looking at the lab scans, it looks like they tended to go a little bit brighter than the home scans. They also tended to add a lot more contrast and warmth to the images overall. So you can see that the Lomography specifically, it looks like they went for more contrast and saturation than they did with the Portra, which tended to be a little bit more on the neutral side. And this is exactly what I expected to see based on other people's comments and reviews of these 2 films. Looking at their scans, it's immediately clear that their scans look way different than mine do, and it's not just because they did color correction. In their files, there's a massive difference between these two film stocks, which I believe comes down to presets. Each machine is going to have its own custom presets for each type of film to bring out their natural characteristics and save time. It applies the preset based on the custom edge markings that are found on the sides of the film. That way, when you get your film scanned at the same lab with the same machine, you're going to have a similar, dependable look. And if you're a pro, this is extremely valuable and necessary because your signature look is what sets you apart and gets you clients. All right, so that's it for this comparison. The one thing that I wanted to get to before going is why Lomography doesn't say their film is Portra 800, even if it might be. And I think the reason Lomography brands the film as their own is probably because Kodak requires them to. Imagine if Lomography was selling Kodak's flagship product at a cheaper cost. In what world would you ever buy the premium product? I personally think this arrangement allows both parties to sell way more film, and everybody gets exactly what they want. It's a beautiful system, even if it's kind of a shared delusion. And to tell you the truth, I think that if Portra 800 is a couple dollars more expensive, there are still many times that I'm going to reach for the Kodak film over Lomography just because of the thicker base. Because this makes archiving the film so much easier. If it's a shoot that I really care about, I'm definitely going Portra. But for everyday photography, you know I'm loaded up on Lomography, which I've used so much more of after they reduced the cost of their 3-packs. So that's it for today's video. I want to give another shout out to Dmitri and Yvonne, who all came together and made this an awesome project to work on. Yvonne's styling and planning the shots and the lighting made everything super easy, and Dmitri's analysis and feedback were vital for the success of the project. Make sure to go check out their stuff because they both took their own deep dives in different directions than I did. And they're both linked below. It's super exciting stuff. All right, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.